China has suddenly become a big issue in this year's presidential election, and both parties are playing the China card to their, believing that will be played in their advantage. Do you think at the end of the day it will make a difference for either of the candidates? We have the Trump and we have Joe Biden. No?
I think there's no difference in terms of direction because right now it's more like a common consensus between the two parties. Both Democrat Party and Republican parties already agree, maybe by accident, that they agree that China is the common strategic rival to the US, especially the expansions of the influence of China in terms of economics. But the difference between the two parties is that how to tackle with the Chinese problems. That's really the difference.
So they have to prove who is tougher than the other in dealing with China, right? I think that's the key.
I think for Republican, it's going to be like more focused on short-term policy, focus on the thing that attack China suddenly, such as trade war. It will be stronger in terms of like protectionism, xenophobia, as well as radicalism policy. If Trump win the presidential again, but if Joe Biden win this election, it will come back to the scenario when Bill Clinton rules, when Obama rules, right? At that time, U.S. will try to initiate another regional trading arrangement. And this regional trading arrangement will design to block China out of the pictures by setting a new rules and regulations in terms of trades and investment.
But all along, Trump has been trying to portray Joe Biden and the Democrats of being weak on China, and himself alone is tough on China. So do you think this message will sell well with the constituents?
I think it sells well for the people who have a short eyesight, right? But people who have a longer visions, they know that China and US is, they have too much trade and investment. They are too much engaging between each other, right? The volume of trades, the value of investment between China and US is too high. Hence, if you try to do the policy like the way Trump did for the past 4 years, that's not only hurts China, but also hurt US trader and investment as well.
So between if President Trump wins again or Joe Biden wins the election, which one will deteriorate the relations between US and China a lot more, in your perspective?
In my perspectives, I think China is more like a, longer visions. They see things in a very, very long term. Hence, they don't prefer the way Trump attacked them. Because this is more like a suddenly shock, right? Hence, but of course, China, especially this Communist Party, they rules the country since 1949. Hence, they adapt a lot, they know a lot, and they pass all the worst and best situations for a very, very long time. And especially right now, China have their own technologies. They have their own innovations, not only in terms of economics, but in terms of military as well as political as well. Hence, they know how to adapt this kind of their homemade technologies in order to, for example, even right now, some of the Chinese producers still cannot access to like Google resources, but they know how to make it work, right? This is the very good example of how China can adapt the whole situation to benefit itself.
Of course, it's quite clear that the US perceives China as a threat. But how does China perceive the US?
I think China never see US as the rival, but China try to, okay, if you don't intervene our domestic affairs, if you don't destroy our longer plan, that's fine. We can share our future together, which is the thing that Xi Jinping keep calling, right? This is the share community, share future, share destiny. This is the thing that Chinese Communist Party try very hard to articulate for the past, 5-6 years.
So is there a possibility that the US-China relations can improve no matter whether Trump or Biden wins the election?
I don't think it's going to improve, right? But it will be more like a, on one side, US still try to contain China, and China try to get out of this containment by Belt and Road initiatives, where US try to contain it by Indo-Pacific strategies. But on the other side, they also need to engage with each other to rebuild the global value chain, right? Because every country benefits from these global value chains. Hence, it will be more complex relations between the two countries. They hate each other very much, but at the same time, they also have to make friends between each other.
Because sometimes they still have to rely on each other, right?
Correct. For example, during COVID-19, China sent so many medical supplies to help US from oxygen tank, the respiratory help thing to PPE.
Trump never mentioned about that.
Trump never mentioned about it, right? But I think, but China mentioned about it.
Yes.
That's fine.
That's good enough.
Okay.
Recently, Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, made a very strong statement about China, right? He described China, specifically the Communist Party of China, as a new tyranny.
New tyranny.
And he urged the free world to unite against this new tyranny. So does it mean that sooner or later, Thailand will be under pressure to join that kind of a united efforts to counter China?
Currently, my team and me study one research paper for TPSO, Trade Policy and Strategy Office, Ministry of Commerce. The topic is Thailand in the New World Order. And from these studies, we see that right now in Southeast, especially in Southeast Asia, there's the vacuum in terms of power. Because right now, US is, decline in the US global dominance. But at the same time, China is not ready yet to replace the leading role. Hence, there's the vacuum in terms of power, right? Because in Southeast Asia, we follow the old world order designed by unipolarity power like US since 1990s. Now it's about to change. But China is not yet ready to set up the rules. Hence, these two parties will try very hard to bring us, Thailand and ASEAN, into their partners. Hence, if we well place our positions, we can benefit from this situation.
When you say well placed, what do you mean by that? How should we place ourselves in this very complex world?
I think right now, for Thailand, especially for Thailand first, we need to play a leading roles in ASEAN communities. Because Thailand with ASEAN community, we can position ourselves as the middle power. Hence, in terms of bargaining power, we can get something. And of course, in terms of international relations, there are so many directions, there are so many perspectives. Hence, on one directions, on one perspectives, we can make friends with US. And on other side, on other issues, we can also make friends with India, with China, with ASEAN, with Japan, with Korea. Hence, we have to position ourselves as the country that seek no enmities, right? We make friends with everybody, right? Where we position ourselves as a place where everybody would like to do trade and investment in our regions. And at the same time, we have to strengthening our strategic partnership with other regional agreements in order to balancing the strategic powers. In this case, I think between US, China, and India.
No, in fact, historically speaking, Thailand has been very good at that, playing the balancing act, right? And we should continue to do
We
that.
we should. And this is not just by accident. We have real intentions in order to do this thing. Because, in the real world, we have to separate between any issues, right? You cannot just put all issues together and mess everything up, right? You have to see the good example of the case of Vietnam. Vietnam and China is the claimant states, especially in the South China Sea, right? They have a territorial dispute. But at the same time, Vietnam is the largest investment destinations from China compared to other countries in Southeast Asia. Vietnam have the most highest trade values between China and ASEAN. Hence, that means they know how to separate between territorial dispute, trade, and investment. This is a very, very good example.
So what would be the challenge for ASEAN now with the balancing the powers with the US and China in this time where the elections are coming up?
I think for ASEAN itself, right now the most challenge is how to realize the so-called collective leadership among the 10 ASEAN countries. Because from our research project, we still forecast that by the next 1 to 2 years, this is short term, and 3 to 5 years, this is the medium terms. ASEAN still based on our ideologies of non-interference to the neighborhood domestic affairs. We will put everything on vote consensus. But how to move this mechanism to create the so-called collective leadership? Collective leadership is more like an, orchestral music orchestra. There are so many parts: woodwind, percussion, brass, for example, right? Each musical instrument have their own musical notes. They play differently, but at some point, this is trumpet part. So trumpet stand up and start to solo. ASEAN need to position something like that. If Thailand is the champion, for example, in terms of connectivity. Hence, when something happens to ASEAN related to physical connectivities, Thailand take a lead role, and 10 countries share responsible for what Thailand make decisions. This is the thing that ASEAN move and try very hard to make it happen. And we designed it in, Vision ASEAN 2040, the next vision that will come after 2025.
And you believe that Thailand can play a leading role in make this orchestra work, right?
Even the Vision 2040 itself is the project by Thailand. Thailand Commission Area Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia to do this research since the year 2017 in order to prepare ourselves to be, you remember, last year we host ASEAN Summit.
That's right.
And right now we already distribute this draft of Vision 2040 to 10 ASEAN leaders.
But coming back to China's role on the world stage, Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, accused China of doing everything it can by hook or by crook to replace the US as the superpower. Right? But China said, no, we never have any intention to replace the US as superpower. So whom should we believe?
We should believe in ourselves, right? Because I think right now, the propaganda style, like the thing that happened during Cold War, it start to happen again. For example, in Cold War, 1960s, 1970s, most of the people think this is the conflict between socialist communists against free world. And this word was, reused again by Mike Pompeo. But actually, Cold War is not the conflict between socialist communists and free world. Because the term free world is more like a, propaganda thing. Because actually, sometimes US takes side with military dictator.
That's right.
Hence, it's not a real free world, right? But it just,
And
more
Thailand was
like
part of the camp, the free world camp.
that's it. That's the way they're trying to find their partner in this vacuum position, in this vacuum stage. Hence, one of my colleagues in this research project, Dr. Am Tang Nirandon, he believed that ASEAN have good wisdom enough in order to learn from the past that once 70 years ago, 50 years ago, we hate each other very much because of this kind of propaganda. So we better not repeat that history again. ASEAN should be stronger than the past. And actually, 53 years ago when ASEAN was established, it also was established because of this reason, right?
That's right. And China also has a very interesting question for the US. The Chinese ambassador to the US recently asked a very, very challenging question. He asked whether the US is ready or will be willing to live with China, which is modernized, strong, and prosperous. So, do you think that China can live with that?
China can live with that. But the problem is,
can
will US live with that, right? I think for the US, it's very, very hard to avoid the situation so-called Thucydides trap, right? When the new superpower nation state try to stay at the same level or even higher, the old superpower cannot allow that to happen. And we always see the clash between the old power and the new power.
So how do you see the possibility of a serious crash? I mean, maybe to the extent of an armed crash between these two superpowers?
I don't think the hard war can happen anymore. Even, during 1970s, 1980s, when there's the disruptive technologies, at that time we call the third industrial revolutions. At that time, Japan seems to be able to become a next superpower stage. Hence, there's the conflict between US and Japan, especially during late 1970s to the early 1980s. But we don't see World War III, right? We see only trade war between US and Japan. And it's ended by Plaza Accord 1985, when Japan was forced to revalue its Japanese yen and change their positions. Hence, I think if there must be a war between China and US, it will not be a hard war, but it will be this kind of thing. And people call it maybe Cold War 2.0, but this Cold War 2.0 will not see a proxy war like Korean War or Iraq-Iran war anymore. It will be in the form of, for example, technology war, virus war, trade war, right? Hence, this is the thing that already happens already, right?
So with the trade war, what is your prospect on this issue? Will this actually improve, or is it going to get even worse from now?
For the trade war, right?
Yes.
It depends on who will be the next US president. If Trump continue to be the next US president, the trade war will be worsened. But if Joe Biden win the election, I think the trade war will be stay in this position for a while to allow Joe Biden to reform domestic structure back in their home USA first. And then when they start to renegotiate, for example, US come back to CPTPP, US come back to TTIPs, Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, at that time, the trade war will be better. Because, like I told you earlier, the two countries engage too much to each other in terms of trade and investment.
So who would be a better leader then between President Trump and Biden for the current situation with the trade war, as well as the relationship with ASEAN countries? Who would be a better leader?
Better for whom? Better for whom?
Actually, when we talk about New World Order, there's more than the aspects of the conflict between China and US. We also think about, for example, international trade, sustainable development, global warming. And if you see this kind of perspective, think out of the framework, just the war between China and the US, Joe Biden seems to be a better choice. At least, I believe Joe Biden will bring US back to Paris environmental agreement, right? And that will make world better in terms of sustainable, in terms of pollutions, in terms of global warming.
So that does mean that countries like Thailand and ASEAN would be more comfortable with Joe Biden as a new president?
I'm not quite sure because, every time when we have an argument related to regional trading arrangement, regional to FTA issues, it's always come because of the rules and regulations initiated by Democrat parties, right? We hate Thai-US FTA, we hate Trans-Pacific Partnership. That's from Bill Clinton, that's from Barack Obama, right? Hence, but this time, we cannot avoid, we cannot drop ourselves out of this kind of negotiations anymore, right? We need a more comprehensive, a higher standards trade and investment agreement in order to create our advantages in this global value chain. But we still cannot imagine yet what kind of agreement, what kind of trade measures they are going to propose in this kind of, maybe next generations of trading arrangements.
But does your team of researchers have an answer yet as to who will win the election?
For our team, we think Biden. But if you, but for Thailand, our research team think in the very, very short run, we set the target with one word, survival. Survival first. And then for the middle term, 3 to 5 years, we think about sustainable. Because right now, Thailand is at a very, very high risk. We are at the upper middle income countries. But with trade war, with COVID-19, with disruptive technologies, we have a very, very high chance in terms of like reverse development to the lower middle income countries. Hence, we better survive at this state first and then going on with a more sustainable thing in the middle term.